Sunday drive home. YouTube theologians, you ready for this? We got Nicodemus was today's lesson. John chapter 3. What a glorious chapter. Now, I was listening to sometime, I don't know, this week or a lecture, and it made this profound point that the nature of God is related to the nature of salvation which God can offer. Now that's kind of a simple point, but it's kind of nice. In other words, if your God is known chiefly by power, then what kind of salvation is going to give you? Well, he's going to probably give you the kind of salvation that you can win through power and put you under his power. In other words, rescue you from slavery to slavery or something like that. But God, the true God, is known chiefly as Father. And that means, okay, I'm getting somewhere. Track with me here. That means that salvation is going to look like family. Now, this shows up then in John chapter 1. So in John chapter 1, we read, to those, he talks about how Jesus wasn't received by other people, but it says, but to those who did receive him, he gave the authority to become the children of God. Now, we should just stop there and marinate. Is that marinade? Marinate? What's the word? Soak it up. We should just stop there and soak it up. Just rest and bask in the glory of it. That we can become children of God. God's children. Children born not of the blood, not of the will of the flesh, not of the will of man, but born of God, it says. That Jesus now is making a way for us to be God's children. I don't wonder, and I want to kind of track this through, but I don't wonder if the Gospel of John is going to unfold this theme in a kind of glorious way and say, okay, now let's just see the people that Jesus calls into God's family. So you have the calling of the disciples, and then you have Nicodemus. He comes to Jesus at night. And you would think that if anybody is going to be the disciple, or is going to be, if anybody is going to be a son of God, a child of God, or part of the family of God, it's going to be Nicodemus. I mean, this was a fancy guy. He was a Pharisee, which is already impressive, but he's a Pharisee of Pharisees because he's part of the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin is, as far as I can tell, that's the 70 ruling elders. It's like the Supreme Court of Israel. It's what Moses invented at Jethro's advice. Remember when Moses was all worn out? And Jethro said, why are you wearing yourself out? Find 70 elders and they can hear the cases before you. And then if it has to escalate, well, that's the Sanhedrin. It's the ruling council. So he's not only a Pharisee, he's part of the Sanhedrin. I got to drink lots of water. I got to weigh in for the weight loss contest this week. Anyhow, I should probably cut that out. So Nicodemus he's a well-known guy, a well-known figure. Part of the Pharisees, part of the Sanhedrin, part of the inner group of the holy people. And yet he comes to Jesus, and look what Jesus says. He says, you have to be born again. Wow. In other words, Jesus says to Nicodemus, I came to make children of God, and you are not one yet. Now, it's interesting to just track a couple of vocab words in the text from John chapter 3. Birth is one, because birth comes up in chapter 1, born not of the will of man and so forth, but born of God and then born again. So there's a direct connection between chapter 1 and chapter 3. But the other interesting thing is that this word kingdom is hardly ever used. The kingdom of God is hardly ever used in the Gospel of John. In fact, and I can't remember exactly, but like when you look at Matthew or Mark or Luke, Jesus is always talking about the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. It's everything is about the kingdom, but in John, it's only used a couple of times. Here, unless you're born from above, you cannot see the kingdom of God. Unless you're born of water and the Spirit, you cannot enter the kingdom of God, Jesus says to Nicodemus. And then in John chapter 18, when Jesus is before Pilate, and he says, my kingdom is not of this world. So Jesus comes to bring about a kingdom, but the kingdom is made up of his family, of his children. And Jesus is now telling Nicodemus how to come into this kingdom. It's not by all your Pharisee stuff. It's not by all the fancy good works of your Phariseeing. Jesus is saying, your salvation is not in yourself at all, it's in me. And he gives the picture of the serpent in the wilderness. Now, this is a great story. I love to imagine it. Think about it. It's back to Numbers chapter 21. So Jesus says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. And that's what happened. So Mount Hor, Aaron has died. They've had some military victories, but they got to go around, I think, Edom. They got to travel around Edom, and the people are complaining. They got no water, we got no food, and our soul, they said, our soul loathes this worthless bread. So the Lord gets angry, and he sends fiery serpents. I do not know what the fiery stands for. I mean, what that means to have a fiery serpent. If it's their poison, or if they're like little dragons, who knows? Not good. And amazingly, the people understand that God was punishing them for their complaining, so they go to Moses and they pray and say, could you please pray to the Lord for us that he'd relent from these serpents? And so Moses goes and prays for the people, and the Lord sends him to make a bronze serpent, and he says, lift it up on a pole, and whoever looks at it will be saved. Now, can you imagine the people there knocking on the door at Moses' tent? Hey, Moses, we need some help out here. We're all being eaten by snakes. We remember how you're Moses and you're supposed to help us with this kind of stuff? And Moses says, don't worry, I got it under wraps. I just got to finish, you hear the hammering, ding, 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 ding. What are you doing in there? Don't worry, it's going to fix the problem. God told me. What are you doing? He says, I'll show you. He says, we want to know. All right, well, I'm making a bronze serpent. Hey, Moses, we got enough serpents out here. We don't need any. We don't need any more. He says, no, guys, look. I'm going to make this bronze serpent, and I'm going to put it on a stick. And if you look at it, you won't die. And at this point, they're saying, Moses has lost it. I mean, he's 119 years old anyways. Maybe we need a new deliverer. A bronze serpent on a stick. Moses, maybe you should make some antidote or some medicine or a serpent blocking fence or something. It's crazy. Now, if we think this is crazy, it is the foolishness of the gospel for sure, but I'll tell you what's even crazier is, can you imagine Moses walks out of the tent and hear these people dying? And he holds up the serpent, and people start looking to it so they can live. And there's this guy laying on the ground, says, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to look at that serpent. Forget it. This is what This is how to be part of the family of God. That's what Jesus is saying to Nicodemus. This is what it takes. You don't earn your way in. You're adopted by grace. And you're given my name. It's amazing to think that then Nicodemus leaves, and who knows where his faith was when he left. It seems like it didn't come along until later. But then in John chapter 7, I think, we see Nicodemus again, who is saying, hey, we got to have a trial. We can't just condemn the guy. But then it's in John chapter 19 when Nicodemus comes with Joseph of Arimathea to get the body of Jesus and bury him. And then we see that he's not afraid anymore. That Nicodemus is a disciple of Jesus and part of God's family. But it takes him a while, and contrast that to what happens in the very next chapter, John chapter 4, when Jesus goes to the well at Samaria, and there the woman becomes, just a messed up life, there the woman becomes a daughter of God. Fantastic. God is chiefly known as Father, and so his glory is found in calling children to glory. Behold, what manner of love the Father has given unto us, that we should be called the children of God.